The Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they ignored all his warnings. So the Lord sent the commanders of the Assyrian armies, and they took Manasseh prisoner. They put a ring through his nose, bound him in bronze chains, and led him away to Babylon. But while in deep distress, Manasseh sought the Lord his God and sincerely humbled himself before the God of his ancestors. And when he prayed, the Lord listened to him and was moved by his request. So the Lord brought Manasseh back to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. Then Manasseh finally realized that the Lord alone is God. You know, it's kind of unfortunate that it's often when we hit our lowest point that we finally draw close to God, but it's like, the good news is, God is there and will hear us out. Even after we've done a bunch of bad things, God did not turn him away despite all the bad things he had done. God was still like, okay, I can tell you're sincere. I hear you. I will put you back where you belong with your people. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Okay, 2 Chronicles chapter 33. So in the recapping of Judah's history, with a lot of focus on the kings, we've gotten pretty close to the end. The last king, Hezekiah, did really well in a lot of things. Kind of maybe was a bit too friendly with some representatives from Babylon. But otherwise, it's not really anything that you'd look at his time as king and be like, wow, that was really dumb, or bad, or whatever. He did a lot of good for the kingdom of Judah. However, he has since passed away, whatever your phrase is for no longer living. And now his son has become king. And as we've seen with previous kings in the succession, just because the previous one was really good doesn't mean their son will be equally good, or even anywhere near as good. Not too much else to say to let you know what's been going on. So here we go, 2 Chronicles chapter 33. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 55 years. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight, following the detestable practices of the pagan nations that the Lord had driven from the land ahead of the Israelites. He rebuilt the pagan shrines his father Hezekiah had broken down. He constructed altars for the images of Baal and set up Asherah poles. He also bowed before all the powers of the heavens and worshipped them. He built pagan altars in the temple of the Lord, the place where the Lord had said, "My name will remain in Jerusalem forever." He built these altars for all the powers of the heavens in both courtyards of the Lord's temple. Manasseh also sacrificed his own sons in the fire in the valley of Ben Hinnom. He practiced sorcery, divination, and witchcraft, and he consulted with mediums and psychics. Almost read that as physics. Anyway, he did much that was evil in the Lord's sight, arousing his anger. His being the Lord's anger. I gotta imagine this note about his sons, or his sacrificing his sons in the fire, will read similar to the last time that came up. Yeah, so could be translated as made his sons pass through the fire. I imagine the original Hebrew wording or whatever is in the manuscripts, like, could potentially mean either. But just as I said before, that it was a pagan practice anyway, pagan ritual kind of thing, and it wasn't what God commanded them to do. And of course, if it actually does, if he did actually sacrifice his own sons, then that much worse. So yeah, after one of the best kings Judah ever had, arguably the best one since at least Solomon, yeah, his son comes in and kind of messes things up. Although, he was only 12 years old when he became king, so you kind of got to wonder how much he was influenced by other people, especially early on during his reign. Like, Joash was a good example of a young king, but only because the people around him, who were the actual adults, who were really sort of leading him, if not actually leading the kingdom, those were good people. Like, he had constant instruction from priests and Levites and those who were already close to God. It doesn't say that for Manasseh here. It doesn't really say that he had, horrible advisors, but there's definitely the possibility, at least as we've read so far. Kind of leaves you wondering why God would allow him to rule for 55 years. But, there's not always, one's loyalty to God does not always determine span of life or leadership. I think we can even see examples of that today. I'm not going to point at anybody, not going to point to anybody specifically, because it's a bit of a tangent and we're not here for that anyway. So yeah, Manasseh does a lot of bad stuff, making a bunch of idols and shrines to pagan gods and things like that. And God's angry. Also doesn't say how old he was when he started doing this stuff. Just saying. Anyway. Alright. On to verse 7. Manasseh even took a carved idol he had made and set it up in God's temple, the very place where God had told David and his son Solomon, "My name will be honored forever in this temple and in Jerusalem, the city I have chosen from among all the tribes of Israel. If the Israelites will be careful to obey my commands, all the laws, decrees, and regulations given through Moses, I will not send them into exile from this land that I set aside for your ancestors." But Manasseh led the people of Judah and Jerusalem to do even more evil than the pagan nations that the Lord had destroyed when the people of Israel entered the land. So, he's not just doing the same kinds of things that the pagan nations did before God's people came into the promised land. According to this, he's doing stuff that's even worse. And part of the reason it's worse might be because he's setting these things up specifically in places that were designated for worshiping the Lord. I'm getting some almost deja vu from when I probably talked about this in 2 Kings. And he didn't just do this stuff himself and say, here's who/what I'm going to worship. It says he led the people of Judah and Jerusalem to do evil things. So he's not just keeping it to himself. It's not just his own private worship life or whatever you want to call it. It's very public at the very least. If not being outright encouraged or even commanded for the other people to do these things. Anyway, verse 10. The Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they ignored all his warnings. So the Lord sent the commanders of the Assyrian armies, and they took Manasseh prisoner. They put a ring through his nose, bound him in bronze chains, and led him away to Babylon. But while in deep distress, Manasseh sought the Lord his God and sincerely humbled himself before the God of his ancestors. And when he prayed, the Lord listened to him and was moved by his request. So the Lord brought Manasseh back to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. Then Manasseh finally realized that the Lord alone is God. Okay, so big turn of events for Manasseh. It's kind of unfortunate that it's often when we hit our lowest point that we finally draw close to God, but it's like, the good news is God is there and will hear us out even after we've done a bunch of bad things. When we're at our lowest point and have pretty much nothing else or no one else to depend on or to even ask for help, God will still come in and change the story. I do wonder a little bit how long that he was imprisoned, but I suppose that's not crucial information to the story. But the point is that when he was, in deep distress, basically at the lowest point of his life, at least up until then, but probably overall, that was when he finally turned to God, and then God did not turn him away despite all the bad things he had done. God was still like, okay, I can tell you're sincere. I hear you. I will put you back where you belong with your people. Okay. Verse 14. After this, Manasseh rebuilt the outer wall of the city of David, from west of the Gihon spring in the Kidron Valley to the Fish Gate, and continuing around the hill of Ophel. He built the wall very high, and he stationed his military officers in all of the fortified towns of Judah. Manasseh also removed the foreign gods and the idol from the Lord's temple. He tore down all the altars he had built on the hill where the temple stood, and all the altars that were in Jerusalem, and he dumped them outside the city. Then he restored the altar of the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings and thanksgiving offerings on it. He also encouraged the people of Judah to worship the Lord, the God of Israel. However, the people still sacrificed at the pagan shrines, though only to the Lord their God. Let me read this next paragraph here. The rest of the events of Manasseh's reign, his prayer to God, and the words the seers spoke to him in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel, are recorded in the book of the kings of Israel. Manasseh's prayer, the account of the way God answered him, and an account of all his sins and unfaithfulness are recorded in the record of the seers. It includes a list of the locations where he built pagan shrines and set up Asherah poles and idols before he humbled himself and repented. When Manasseh died, he was buried in his palace. Then his son Ammon became the next king. Manasseh at least undid a bunch of the bad stuff that he did, specifically in and around the temple of the Lord. However, it seems like he didn't go full tilt and destroy all of the things that were set up around the kingdom. Now, I do find it interesting that the people were sacrificing at the pagan shrines, but to the Lord. It makes me wonder if they were, doing that just kind of themselves, their own way, rather than, having the priests go through the proper rituals and things like that. I mean, it's certainly not unheard of for God to repurpose things. Even things that were initially, like, anti-God. But the fact of the people using the pagan shrines to make their offerings, like, it's not ideal. It's not the way that it was supposed to happen. Not the way that God commanded. That's, I guess, part of the reason I felt it necessary to point out that Manasseh didn't go, like, all the way with undoing the harm / damage, or whatever you want to call it, that he had done to the kingdom. At least, with regard to turning people away from the Lord. Note here in verse 19, I could say the record of Hosea instead of the record of the seers. My guess is Hosea was a particular person, probably a seer, but I'm not real sure about that. That's definitely not a biblical record. This book of the Kings of Israel might actually be like what we call First and Second Kings. But yeah, nothing that matches that record of the seers in the Bible, to my knowledge. Unless it's got an entirely different name. I don't seem to recall Second Kings looking so positively upon the end of Manasseh's reign. But anyway, I'll just move along. On to verse 21. Ammon was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 2 years. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight, just as his father Manasseh had done, at least at one point. He worshipped and sacrificed to all the idols his father had made. But unlike his father, he did not humble himself before the Lord. Instead, Ammon sinned even more. Then Ammon's own officials conspired against him and assassinated him in his palace. But the people of the land killed all those who had conspired against King Ammon, and they made his son Josiah the next king. I mean, Ammon was only king for 2 years. He probably didn't even have the time that Manasseh had to, humble himself, as it says in here. He probably didn't have time like Manasseh did. Manasseh was king, 55 years it said? Yeah, 55 years. So, I actually had another thought about an earlier verse, because it mentioned Manasseh removed the foreign gods and the idol from the Lord's temple, and he dumped them outside the city. Just says that he dumped them. Didn't destroy them. I don't think, removed. Now, it does say he tore down all the altars on the hill and dumped them. So, those might have been legitimately destroyed. But, it makes me wonder if some of the things weren't totally destroyed and might have gotten picked up by somebody else. Ammon, in any case, I would think... I mean, I guess it's possible for him to, worship these idols without necessarily doing it in the temple. Because all the stuff like that from the temple was supposed to be gone. So, in any case, yeah, short, bad king for Judah in Ammon here. And I don't really have too many other thoughts. So yeah, he got assassinated, but then the assassins got killed, so if the assassins were going to, choose somebody else to be king, they didn't really get a chance. So, it still followed the typical kingly succession, and Ammon's son Josiah became the next king. Okay, that's really all I got for now on 2nd Chronicles chapter 33. So there you have it. So, I gotta say, I think it's been a little while since we've read about a redemption arc the likes of Manasseh's in this chapter. Like, starts off totally against God, putting up idols everywhere and all that kind of stuff. But then he gets taken captive, put in prison, and finally, then, at his low point, humbles himself, turns to God, and at least does things better. Like, he doesn't completely fix everything that he did earlier in his reign, but at least he gets rid of some of the stuff, some of the bad stuff. But yeah, it still, to my recollection, is kind of the big thing that sets in motion the end of the kingdom of Judah. Well, kind of. Sets up God's motivation for allowing the end of the kingdom of Judah. The practical part of it actually might have happened the chapter before with Hezekiah giving a little too much info to the Babylonian representatives, but I digress. So yeah, that's the main thing that happened in this chapter. As always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description for links to social media pages and all sorts of good stuff there. All the different ways you might want to, keep up with my content, interact, help support if you're so inclined, and all that good stuff. And of course, down below the description, feel free to leave your thoughts and questions in the comments. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. Whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.